When I think of my wife, I always think of her head. I picture cracking her lovely skull.
Now, if that doesn't scream Valentine's, I don't know what does. Love is in the air. I mean, unless that was COVID I got a whiff of. And your girlfriend is trying to convince you to watch one of them terrible Hallmark movies, but you tell her, nah, we're watching... Wait, actually just... But it's gonna take some convincing, so I have a list of 4 themes of what makes Gone Girl the perfect romantic Valentine's Day movie. Marriage, manipulation, dishonesty, and parenting. All important things in any relationship.
What we did was resent each other and try to control each other and cause each other pain.
That's marriage.
Marriage is, on top of everything else, 2 people saying they want to keep discovering each other over time, which makes it, on top of everything else, an enormous leap of faith. People are unpredictable. They are also changeable, and that tension, familiarity, and mystery bound together helps explain the profound creepiness of David Fincher's Gone Girl. Nick and Amy talk a lot about other couples and most people, and they congratulate themselves on how charmingly non-basic their own relationship manages to be. Amy even says how much she does not want to be a part of those basic marriages where we're always pecking at each other, disguising insults as jokes, rolling our eyes, and playfully scrapping in front of our friends, hoping to lure them to our side of an argument they could not care less about. Those awful if-only relationships. This marriage would be great if only. Well, if only they would have known what was waiting in the future ahead of them were affairs, fake murders, and real murders. If only. The Dunnes were never, under any definition of the term, good people, but the ongoing twist of a twist-filled movie is that they become, together, grotesquely terrible people. And their terribleness, at least the parts of it Fincher allows us to see, is contingent and contextual. Nick and Amy have, by virtue of their marriage itself, helped to make each other who and what they are. Soon after Nick and Amy marry, a series of stresses, lost jobs, a move to the suburbs to care for a sick mother, the death of that mother, and a disagreement about whether to have children, which may or may not be true, more on that in a sec, cause Amy to lose the cool, amazing Amy persona she flaunted at the beginning of the relationship. There was little Nick could do about it, just as there was little Amy could do about Nick's affair he was having with his student. The turning points in that transformation are difficult to identify. Was she ever the person he imagined her to be? Was he the one she thought he was? The reality is that it didn't matter, and the dark commentary on marriage, while of course hyperbolic, has a lot to say here, as it becomes clear that Amy and Nick do not really know each other, or what the other is capable of. The idea of marriage is further unsettled as the film goes on. However, in the end, there's a very dark version of the idea that the two are actually made for each other, and derive a perverse pleasure from being together. Of course, Nick ends up staying with Amy through her master. Throughout Gone Girl, Fincher repeatedly asks questions about authenticity, both in how we view and present ourselves. Nick is witty and seems to share a good relationship with his sister, but at the same time, he remembers every slight and lets his resentment build up internally. In the opening of the film, he coldly describes how he pictures his wife's skull, cracking it open to unspool her brain and sift through her thoughts. Which, as dark as that sounds, that opening line is a perfect introduction to the film, as that's exactly what we do. The majority of the story plays out through the perspective of Amy and the thoughts she had in her head. Amy is emotionally volatile, yet calculating. It's hard to tell whether her heart is made of ice or gold. She laments the person others have made her, the amazing Amy of the children's books her parents based on her. The cool girl she became while dating Nick? She's forever in fear that no one would really love her if she showed her true self. Because let's be honest, she's never really revealed it. And yet we see Amy craft her identities carefully, repeatedly forging personalities within her mind and conducting those around her like a mass orchestra. Both Nick and Amy's fear centers on one question: how unconditional can love really be? In their mad efforts to delay the answer to that question, Amy and Nick act simultaneously as master manipulators, working towards ends that cannot be reconciled. Nick realizes what his wife has done and becomes enraged with her, yet he's able to successfully manipulate her through the statements he makes to the media, enticing her back to him. And even though we're inside their heads, it's impossible to know whether the selves they are presenting to us are accurate, or whether they are telling yet another story to win us to their side. Amy and Nick have both been shaped, and to some extent traumatized, by the parenting they experienced as children. Nick's father was an angry, embittered misogynist, and he is terrified of resembling him. While Amy's parents appear to be loving and supportive on the surface, they are instead extremely demanding and in subtle ways make Amy feel inadequate. They have always expected her to be the amazing Amy from the books and never accepted her for who she was. They expect the money they demand from Amy, and they receive it. Her parents are constantly concerned with their appearance and how they come off to the public, such as the scenes in which they put on their front of genuine caring parents when in front of the large crowds of volunteers. Nothing is ever good enough for them, as we can also see with the way they have always treated Nick. This drives Amy to be ruthless in her demands on herself and others around her, while also seemingly never being satisfied. Parenting also casts a shadow over the film's conclusion. Knowing how destructive bad parenting can be, Nick is determined to not leave Amy with sole custody of their child, and thus is trapped in his marriage. During the entire film, the characters lie not only to each other, but to the audience as well. Amy's elaborately staged disappearance is the most visible case of dishonesty. Nick, however, also lies to both Amy and other individuals in order to conceal secrets, such as his aforementioned affair, as well as information that could have proved valuable to the police. The revelation that Amy's entire diary was faked shows that we as the audience cannot necessarily rely on the narrative being shown to us. For example, while we do see a flashback scene showing Nick Dunne pushing Amy, it is then revealed that Amy's diary is an unreliable narrator, telling the true story of their happy early years together, before fabricating several allegations of abuse and violence. This idea not only further proves how everything in this dreamlike film should be taken with a grain of salt, but it also goes to prove that Amy was only very satisfied when things were too good to be true. I tend to believe that Nick did not actually push Amy, especially as they were supposedly arguing over Nick not wanting to have children. Nick later tells his sister that he did in fact want children, and even visited a fertility clinic, which is proven to be true at the end of the film. I think Amy falsified the event in order to suggest that Nick was capable of violence, which of course could then be used as evidence against him in her murder case. However, the film leaves things ambiguous enough that a similar event could have happened. Nick is shown to have a temper throughout the film, shown particularly when he smashes his glass, and he does get physical in his final fight with Amy at the end of the film, suggesting he was definitely capable. The film is not interested in giving a conclusive answer. Some of the biggest themes in the film are perspective of modern society and the media's obsession with the sensationalist side of the story, rather than the factual, often simpler events that actually happen. But the ongoing theme of dishonesty is particularly striking and disturbing because marriage is often expected to be rooted in trust and intimacy, and yet we see that Amy and Nick lie to each other and us constantly. My final thoughts are that if your relationship doesn't at least mirror the one in this film a little bit, then I hate to break it to you, it's a bit vanilla. Boring! But for real though, all I want for Valentine's Day this year would be a like and subscribe, so if you could make that happen, it would mean the world, and I'll catch you all for the next video.